All right, so today we're going to be working on a new value scale. So remember, a value scale is when we go from a very light value to a very dark value. So this value scale is going to only have 5 squares, so make sure you grab the correct little sheet of paper, and we will be doing it at the bottom of ours. So once we're done, we will glue it in the sketchbook. So for this one, we will still need our pencils. So we can grab whichever one you want. You can choose whichever. I suggest that you do not use the 2H pencil, but possibly go a little bit higher between the 2B, 4B, or 6B. So we will start from our first square. So our first square is going to be the square to the left side of our value scale, and it's going to be the lightest value that we will have on this little scale. So what we're going to do is just use this pencil throughout our whole entire value scale. So for the first one, we are going to keep our pressure very, very light in order to keep the value light in this square. So you can move the paper around, rotate it in order to not get out of those lines of that little square. So make sure you just keep the pencil very light and fill all of that in. After we're done with our lightest value, what we will do is move on to our darkest value, so the square to the right. So for this one, we will put definitely a lot more pressure than we did for our first square, and we can go over it a couple of times. So make sure you just rotate your paper, color in that entire square, and just go on top of that color that you already created in different directions just to make it darker. So once we are done with this darker square, what we will have to do is find our middle ground. So a value that is right in between our lightest value and our darker value. So to start that square, it is going to be our middle square, and we will use just a medium amount of pressure. So as you could tell, with our lightest value, we just used barely any pressure, and that was how we were able to achieve that light color. And for our darker value, we put a little bit more pressure and we went over it a couple of times. So that's how we achieved that dark value. So for this middle one, we are still going to go over it a couple of times, but we're not going to use as much pressure as for our darkest color. Once we're done with those, we will find our medium to light and medium to dark squares and values. So we will start from our medium to light. So that will be our second square, and we are going to keep a kind of light pressure and then go over it a couple of times to find that medium to light value. So when we're looking at the value scale, we're going to see very light, medium to light, so a little bit darker than that light, and then a medium value, which is going to be dark to that medium to light. And then we will eventually find our medium to dark and then our darkest value that we're able to achieve all with the same pencil. So for this one, we are not going to have to switch pencil at all. We will then start filling out our last square. So that is going to be a little bit more pressure, and we will go over it a couple of times just to make sure that we are able to achieve that color between that medium and that darker value. So just make sure you go over it and that you try to find a color that's a value that's in the middle between those two, and we should be able to notice the difference between all three. Once we're done and we're happy with our value scale and all the values in it, what we're going to do is we are going to start cutting it out and gluing it to our sketchbook. Once it's glued, please make sure that you put down which pencil you used right next to it. So for example, for this one, I used the 2B. So I will write that down right next to my value scale. And then from that middle square to the right, I will draw an arrow going towards the darkest value. And I will write right underneath it, I will put more pressure equals darker value. And then I will do the same thing, but going the opposite way. So to our lighter value, and I will draw that little arrow, and I will write down less pressure equals lighter value. And this will be the end of our value scale for the day.